Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome back to the DMZ.
It's an early week DMZ, a Tuesday.
Yes, I am allegedly going to be venturing into our nation's capital for the first, well, I've been there a couple times, but this will be my first quasi-business lunch meeting in like 14 months or something.
Wow.
So wish me well. It's good to get back.
But you're not going to get a haircut for it.
I'm not going to get, well, this is with my my buddy, Jamie Weinstein. Jamie and I used to have, when we worked together at the Daily Caller, and then even subsequently, we used to have lunch 2 or 3 times together a week. And then actually the last time we all went out to dinner in Georgetown was the last time any of us went out to dinner was, I guess in March of last year. So I don't feel like I need to put on airs or cut any hairs to see Jamie. There will be a razor will not touch my hair.
I think I am gonna cut this before my wedding anniversary next month.
Yeah. I don't know why people are so interested in our hair. I don't understand it. I don't get why people weigh in on hair. But there's a lot of comments. Like just so Bill, one of the great things about this show, as you know, is it serves as a testing ground for ideas. And like last week, I got on this rant as a kind of an impassioned rant about these Republicans who are tolerating Trump, and sort of that you get what you tolerate. And I just sort of went off and on this rant, and I'm like, that was pretty, like, I had something to say there. I ended up turning it into a column, and that column got me on to Morning Joe to talk about it. So the circle of life, and then Rate My Room, or the Room Rater, gave me a 10 out of 10 for this backdrop right here, which is my second 10 out of 10. So I've definitely made upgrades over the course of the year. It was really not a good background earlier, and I have worked assiduously to improve. And but I got some comments about my hair. Like, it was like, room looks good, needs a haircut. And that may or may not be true, but like, why do people care?
There's no pandemic hair raider Twitter account yet, correct?
There should be. There should be. But I don't know why people, do you have a theory why people care about the hair?
I mean, people have made snarky comments about the way people look, since the country's founding, and I'm sure in other places beforehand. I mean, it's when I read presidential biographies, it's always striking me how there's always commentary in people's diaries about how these people looked. And what that meant about their leadership skills. The fact that George Washington cut a striking figure on a horse was like a big deal. Yeah. So I think people have always been making snap judgments based on appearance for a very, very long time. And I just don't think that and everything involving TV is very, very appearance driven.
Yeah. And I'll admit, I've had a few bad hair days here in the DMZ. There have been some awkward hair days in the past. I'm going to cop to that. But anyway, the cool thing was that our conversation and my rant really paid off. And so this is why I do. This is why no matter what, we can't quit doing this, because I just can't afford it. I need the idea. I also wanted to, Bill, before we move on, I just wanted to give a shout out to our DM Zoomers. Last Friday,
they get hazard pay for last Friday.
Last Friday, as we do our weekly chat, our weekly Zoom chat. And I want people to understand, this isn't like just Bill and Matt opining and other people watching. This is a conversation where other people talk. I guess you and I probably talk half the time, and other people probably talk half the time. Is how it usually shakes out, I would guess. But we got into some heavy stuff, man. We did, I don't know, a half hour on abortion and 20 minutes on anti-Semitism. So it was heavy. It was deep. I was really impressed, though, with the folks who we've gotten to know, many of them, over the course of the last year, doing these DM Zoom chats. With the pandemic, we started doing these every week. And I was really impressed that we had this civil debate and discussion. There were people on, I don't think there was any anti-Semites on the call, but there were definitely people who had opposing viewpoints on some of these hot button issues. And I think they did it in a really smart, civil way.
It certainly was civil, and we have a great group of people that are involved. I don't know if we should have this be the model. These should be our topics on a regular basis, because these are very charged topics, and they are hard to talk about. We did, I think, the best we could. They
were timely. They were timely, and they were also topics that we had not talked about on the actual DMZ. And,
this is mostly my fault. Matt's always trying to talk about fun things like baseball and movies. And I was like, people don't want to hear us talk about baseball and movies. They want to talk politics. And we didn't get to talk about the Supreme Court taking the Mississippi ban case on the show last week, so I thought we should talk about it on the Zoom. And this I heard, from our people, that there's little in life more frustrating than hearing two men pontificate about abortion. I have a piece in the queue for the monthly where I'm going to talk about this some more. So forgive me for not, heeding.
So you've definitely listened to that.
I think what's very hard with it is, it's an issue that affects women very profoundly. And here you got people we're not going to be put in that position. We're not going to have to make that choice directly. And no matter where you stand on the subject, just talking about the politics of it can seem very glib and not properly sensitive. Now, I did it anyway in this column that hasn't come out yet, because I do think the politics are important to understand. Wherever you fall on the issue. But I do want to keep front and center that, and part of the political analysis is this is not just another issue.
Yeah.
This is not just some other thing you talk about for fun on Facebook. This is something that has very, very profound implications for people's lives.
And, and there were a couple of our, I have to say, Bill, we've been doing good for a while there. Our male-female ratio was pretty out of whack. And lately, I think it might be the hair that's attracting this.
You're now going to ruin the improvements in the ratio, man.
The diverse audience, but it's been better. And I saw in the chat function a couple of ladies voice this, and you and I think, kind of turned it over to them for a while. And then one of our male shareholders, we'll call them, pushed back and said, I don't like this. And I think in a respectful way, like, I don't like this notion that you have to be male or female or white or black or whatever to have an opinion about something. So that was an interesting pushback. And I think it was all done very civilly. The other thing I'll say, Bill, I here's the weird thing. We ended up getting in this discussion about this question about like, could Donald Trump be extradited out of Florida if he's indicted or something? And like, one of the participants on this call was like, "Oh yeah, I authored the opinion in California about that." It's just amazing the quality of people. And then we're like, "Okay, well, tell us about it." He talked for 5 minutes. It's just amazing the caliber of some of the people who participate as more or less spectators on these calls.
So if you haven't, now I think we will not talk about abortion ever again on the DMZ. But
until maybe a year from now, when the Supreme Court,
I mean, when they rule, we'll have no choice. Yeah. Perhaps we can avoid it between now and then.
I was trying to get, we used to have a lot of guests on the DMZ. I think we had like Steve Kornacki came on during the election, and different people, and some of these were off the record. Some of these I simulcast on my podcast. So I tried to get David French to come on and just brief us on the case, and that would have taken the heat off of us a little bit. And he was very nice. He just wasn't able to do it, so we had to delve into that. And of course, neither of us. Not only are we both dudes, and neither of us are lawyers, also. So luckily, a couple of the people on our Zoom chats are. So
I'll say this just for folks who want a preview of what I have coming in the monthly. What I think Republicans are not anticipating properly is if the Supreme Court rules to uphold the Mississippi law, or they could, how they do that has some relevance. How much are they going to eat into Roe and Casey in doing so? But if they uphold it, they will breathe life into all sorts of state bans. They may not automatically validate all of them all at once, depending on, again, the particulars of the ruling. But anything that's on the books is going to get a new lease on life. And I think a lot of sort of federalist conservatives like to say, "Oh, it's just throwing it back to the states." If you're in a blue state, you'll still be able to get abortion. It's just the places that don't want it. They're the ones that'll ban it. And putting aside the fact that there are individual people in all of these states, that if you're in the minority view, it still affects you. But more broadly politically, we don't have just red and blue states. We have purple states. We have states that are trending blue. We have states that are trending blue because of population shifts that are bringing college-educated people into places that were more red. And there's a clear gap in view on abortion based on college education. So if you're a Republican and you want to get back Arizona and Georgia, and you're worried about Texas, here's Texas just after the Supreme Court decides to take this case. They passed the so-called fetal heartbeat ban, and with the risk of getting into a semantic debate here, technically speaking, you're not a fetus until like 11 weeks. You're an embryo before that, and you don't even have a heart at 6 weeks. So whatever rhythmic things you're picking up in ultrasounds, technically speaking, is not a heartbeat. Be that as it may, there are a number of bans like this that have passed in certain states, and if the Mississippi 15-week ban wouldn't automatically legalize a de facto 6-week fetal heartbeat ban. But it would probably make people think, hey, maybe this thing can survive. Maybe this is we should push this up the legal chain and see where it flies. Texas has gone from a 15-point Republican state to a 5-point Republican state, 6-point Republican state presidentially in the past 3 elections. Why, if you're a Republican, would you want to elevate this issue if you want to keep your hold on Texas, seeing where the state's moving demographically? So I just feel like Republicans have not thought this through in terms of the political ramifications for themselves.
Could be, winning is losing and losing is winning sometimes in the court. But anyway, we got into that pretty good in the DM Zoom. So what do you want to talk about today?
Well, you have a piece up at the Beast about
another optimistic, cheery topic. So the piece is about the rise in violent crime, especially in cities, and I do not root this on, even if it hurts Democrats. I think it probably would politically, because I think Biden, if it gets bad again, like it was, in the 60s and 70s, fair or not, it would hurt Biden. But also just because Democrats control most big cities, it would tend to implicate them, again, fair or not. So I think it would reinforce this narrative or this sense that, tough on police policies cleaned up cities like New York. And now that we've started to get away from them, crime is coming back. Like, that may actually not be the accurate story, but it's a very simple story that rings true. And so I think I've been talking, and I'm sure people think I'm concern trolling here, but Joe Biden is trying to be this transformational political figure, and he may be, but I think that you have a piece about inflation. I think that right now there is this trifecta of troubles, right? There's the border crisis, which I've written about. There is inflation, which I've written about, and there is crime, which I've now written about. And in each instance, Biden says it's like just a blip. That's the spin or wishful thinking. Oh yeah, there's a border crisis, but it's cyclical. This happens every spring. Even though apparently it's the worst it's been in like 20 years. Or, inflation, but that was to be expected. And this is just, I forget the term they use, transitory or something or other. And the same thing with crime. It may just be this huge uptick we've seen. And I guess Ezra Klein has a podcast out about it. But this big uptick in the last year, it coincides with COVID and the COVID lockdowns, as well as the George Floyd killing. And so like these three things actually could be blips, or they could be something much worse. And that would not bode well for Joe Biden, of course.
Well, I think you want to be careful. I mean, I think it's appropriate to flag the issue. I mean, if you're Joe Biden, you don't want to be, behind the curve. You want to anticipate what might be coming.
Yeah.
You want to prepare for some recalibrations if need be. But we're certainly not at the point yet where there is such a crime wave going on that it is eating into Biden's approval, that it's causing a demand for some kind of federal legislation, that's making, it's not upending Biden's agenda at this moment. And what I don't, we had an extended period of serious crime, of high levels of crime, late 70s into the 80s, that was very damaging to Democrats, clearly was a main factor in Michael Dukakis losing to George H.W. Bush. And Clinton had to reposition the party on crime, and that led to the 94 crime bill. Joe Biden is a central figure in that recalibration. Joe Biden is involved in several pieces of crime legislation, often parting with Strom Thurmond, in part to change the perception of the Democratic Party So it's not seen as soft on crime. So it's not like he is unaware of the potential potency of the issue. What I don't know would get replicated this time around is whether is any increase in crime going to be more is not going to be a spread out around the country. If it's in urban centers that are heavily democratic, we've become much more ideologically sorted than we were in the 70s and 80s. So if this is something that is happening in the cities, but not so much in the suburbs, does it impact Democrats in the same way? Now, it may change Democratic politics within those cities.
Like Rudy Giuliani.
Well, Giuliani was able to take New York from Democrats on crime concerns. Now you have a New York City mayoral election where Republicans don't have a strong candidate in the offing. They have a primary going on, but they don't have a Giuliani type figure in their primary. Everyone assumes whoever the Democrats pick will be the mayor. But it could be the person seen as the most conservative, relatively speaking, on police issues, and that is Eric Adams. Now, and Yang, who has been the front runner most of this time, is also someone who's running as a moderate on crime issues, too. The people who have been most progressive on crime have not broken into the top two slots in what polling we've seen. Adams is a former police officer. He walks a fine line. He's someone who says, I've been a police reformer. He's African American. He says he's been a victim of police violence when he was young. He entered the police force to change from the inside, and tries to own that reform moniker, but at the same time saying there's ways we can still do stop and frisk. If I'm in a church, I'm going to carry my own gun. I'm not going to have a security detail as mayor. I'm going to pack heat myself. So he tries, and people who have said that they should have more decriminalization of drugs, he has said, we know what crack did to our communities. We're not going to let that happen again. So he is walking a more moderate line on these issues and may well win this race. You just had a Philly DA primary where the very progressive incumbent won handily, and will presumably win the general election as well. So that made some people say, okay, whatever backlash is happening, it's not that big because it didn't knock this guy off of his perch. New York may take a different line than Philly did. And that might not just be about crime, mind you. There's other issues at play there. But if Adams did win, or even if Yang wins, that suggests that urban Democrats are not going far left on these issues in the present moment.
Well, I mean, as you noted, there is an irony that Joe Biden was in politics in the 1970s when inflation was a big problem, when crime was a big problem. And it is a little bit ironic that we are being potentially revisited by these. It's possible that he is uniquely positioned because of that to handle them if he's not a hostage of, I think, his party's woke left. So that will be that will probably be kind of a test of his toughness and his resolve.
Well, the inflation issue, it's not exactly analogous to what Jimmy Carter went through, because Jimmy Carter wasn't coming on the heels of a pandemic or a Great Depression of any sort. There was a long period of difficulty with inflation after a period of economic growth. Nixon had price controls. Gerald Ford had the whip inflation now buttons. So it didn't start with Carter. There was this whole problem in the 70s. Like, what do we do about this? We're trying all these different things and nothing seems to be working. And it wasn't until Carter's Fed chair, Paul Volcker, came in hard with the interest rate hikes that it finally got tamed, but it didn't help Carter.
Well, this is partly why I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago, Bill, where I said, one of the people that Biden, ostensibly wants to emulate is LBJ. And obviously he's talking about the Great Society, but LBJ is maybe not the best model for a bunch of reasons, and I think some of it has to do with a lot of these problems started with LBJ, and that's my point. You're talking about like who's going to win the New York mayoral race next year or something like that. If these things, if we are revisited by out of control crime and inflation, the problem, this isn't something that is just going to hit for a year. Like this would become a long-term and enduring challenge, I think, for several years. And it wouldn't just potentially undermine Biden's ability to be that transformational president, but I think it would really give Republicans who have no right to be let back in the game. It would let them back in the game. And I think it would reaffirm negative stereotypes that haunted the Democratic Party for many years, and really they've only gotten away from that, somewhat recently. So I think this could be, again, these could be blips. Maybe they go away, but if they're not, then I think that they could be kind of long-term trends, and that's bad for Biden and also the Democratic Party.
Well, I think there's more of a potential for Biden to have an LBJ parallel than a Jimmy Carter parallel, because LBJ was someone who also tried to go big, came in. Didn't come in. Biden coming off an assassination, so he didn't have that same. But he came with a fair amount of momentum, and LBJ in more of a macabre way, the same, and sold big, great society, war on poverty, Medicare, civil rights, and LBJ in the short run suffered politically. Obviously Vietnam looms large here too, but I think also selling big domestic policy ideas that didn't make things magically wonderful overnight. You pass the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and you get the Watts riots, I think, in 1965. That leaves a bad taste in some people's mouth. You said you were going to fix everything, right, and things are still bad. Yeah. And so LBJ not only wasn't able to survive politically. I think I believe they had a bad midterm in 1966, and he couldn't run again. He felt he couldn't run again in 1968. That led to some discrediting of liberalism that lingers into the 70s and 80s and beyond. So on one end, yes, that's a risk for Biden. He's going to do some big things that don't work out perfectly, that bruise liberalism / progressivism. But at the same time, LBJ did leave real legacies. The Civil Rights Act looks very good in the arc of history, as does Medicare, as does welfare. I know welfare is still a dirty word in some circles, but there is academic research to say, look, people are that we have less poverty now when you factor in government benefits. There's less poverty now than before than before the Great Society.
I'm just saying, I don't want to go through that piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago, but I'm just saying, and I concede all the things you said, but, if LBJ is one of your major models, it's worth noting that, he couldn't even run for re-election, and that after he left office, Republicans pretty much dominated the executive branch for the next generation or something. So it's an interesting thing to aspire to, although I will concede he had an enduring and important legacy. I also think, Bill, going back to your comment about this kind of being just in the big cities, I didn't even put this in my column because it just didn't fit. My column about crime was focused on violent crime, but apparently San Francisco's retailers in San Francisco are closing down because of shoplifting run amok. There was a piece in the New York Times. I'm not sure how legit it is, but there must be something to it. But, Bill, it got to a point, and again, there was the Vietnam. There was the downing of the rescue attempt to free Iranian hostages. There was a lot of bad stuff happening. You had Altamont and different things like in the 60s and stuff happening. But ultimately, we got to a point where the culture was putting out movies like Dirty Harry and Death Wish. And that, I think, was a sign of the frustration and the sense that New York was ungovernable. And I think that, had consequences. Ezra Klein argues that this would lead to the rise of a Richard Nixon / Donald Trump return. Or it could. So that's something to consider.
I certainly believe that if crime was widespread and people felt, afraid, that is the recipe for a Nixon, George Wallace, Donald Trump, that kind of politics. But I also,
Bill, we're seeing. Nowadays, you go on Twitter and you're seeing Jewish Americans being harassed or beaten or yelled at, and that could be a very disturbing trend that is indicative of what's happening in the cities, or that could be an anomaly. That might be rare, but we're seeing it on social media. So if something bad happens in New York or San Francisco, it's not just going to be picked up by the daily news. It's going to spread.
Yes, and we've long seen, we see conservatives say, why don't you Democrats care about what's going on in Chicago? Like Chicago's the only city in the universe, and no other problems in the country matter. So I agree that conservatives will take what's going on in the cities and try to extrapolate and use it to paint Democrats badly. But my point is, if things are happening in the cities, if crime is spiking in the cities, but not so much in the suburbs, and Democrats at the local level respond to it in savvy ways. Democrats may be able to show, look, we're taking this problem seriously and we're governing and we're doing it in a way that fits the values of the people in these cities. Part of the whole thing with New York is Giuliani drove this broken windows theory that if you arrest all these people for low-level crimes, you will clean up the whole city in the process, and you'll reduce the more serious crimes. And that theory's taken a lot of hits because crime, even though crime went down in New York City, it went down a lot of other places too. And Bill de Blasio, for all the knocks that he's gotten, and yes, I know crime has risen recently in the pandemic, but for the entirety of his term, crime was doing just fine.
I can tell you just anecdotally, I traveled to New York a lot in the last 5 years when I was a CNN commentator. And during that time, from the time I started going to, we were in Midtown, from the time I started going until the time I quit going, which was right before COVID, it anecdotally, it did feel like it was getting a little more sketchy every time I went.
I always heard these anecdotes, but the data hadn't backed up the anecdotes for a long time. My only point is that Democrats have an opportunity here to govern, and I think they have the ability to address crime. I'm not saying this is an easy thing, but I don't think they have to go full Giuliani to show they can manage crime. They need to find a way to show that there is a a blend of, progressive compassion and seriousness towards crime reduction that works. And if that works at the urban level where Democrats are concentrated, then perhaps it doesn't spread and cause a nationwide panic about crime that feeds a Nixon, Wallace, Trump-like figure.
I'm just saying, so as a conservative columnist writing at a mainstream outlet where, I'm one of the opportunities that a liberal reader will have to confront conservative viewpoints. And it just seems like in the past couple, since Biden took over, I've really kind of been dividing my time between pointing out how horrible the Republican Party is and just hoping that we can fix it, but just documenting the cowardice and all that on the right. And that was the piece that got me on Morning Joe, right? Mm-hmm. I was talking, that rant I went on about how what you're willing to tolerate, you're willing to get, and Republicans were willing to tolerate Trump, and that's what they got. And they were willing to sublimate their honor and anger and integrity. But then the other, I think, deliverable that I'm giving is pointing out, and I think this is actually good for Democrats and Biden. I'm not suggesting Biden reads my column, but maybe he ought to. I mean, these are real potential problems. Like, and he may, again, maybe they're blips, but these could plague him. These issues, and so I think a lot of liberals don't want to mention it because why jinx it? The Republicans are so crazy. We should focus on them.
Well, I think we should turn to the Republicans soon to wrap up the show. But I'll say this: I have a piece up the monthly about inflation risk for Biden, and what I think is the most pronounced risk is what could it do to the child tax credit expansion. I might have talked about this last week. I can't remember, to be honest. But if inflation is not abated by November, December, and the expanded child tax credit expires in December, and Democrats are getting hit for putting too much money into the system, that's going to undercut the argument for continue to put more money in the system by giving people monthly checks with expanded child tax credit. Now, I think that maybe they can mitigate that by having it be paid for with offsetting tax revenue or spending cuts. But
the irony is, wasn't there just a big story about how we're losing population? There's, birth dearth. I mean,
that was in the Times. So anyway, I think it is worthwhile to raise the question, to anticipate the bad thing. It might not happen. Again, I didn't say inflation will be with us in December. I said right at the onset, I have no idea if it's going to be here in December or not. But we did just have inflationary data this month, so it's not ludicrous to talk about. But you do get a lot of folks on the left immediately coming to you saying, "Oh, Democratic president, here we go with the inflation talk again." Yep. And I agree, you shouldn't overly assume, but to me, it's not healthy to be that deep into your own echo chamber that you don't think about, inconvenient possibilities and anticipate them and prepare for them.
You should be, you should be thinking what could go wrong. You know what I mean? And let's take this seriously.
Right. I wouldn't be, some hack like Matt Lewis and say, Biden is sure to be Jimmy Carter, all is lost for Joe Biden. That's taking the point too far, in my opinion. But you should think about
it. I have not said that.
But you should think about what might happen and is there something you should do now to anticipate that? I mean, it doesn't mean you have to say, oh, there might be inflation in December, forget about your child tax credit. Just throw that overboard. I mean, that to me is not necessarily the right approach, but you should think about what can I do to save this in this circumstance.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn to Trump. I mean, we got the whole or the Republicans. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. It's murderer's row.
Well, do you think that Republicans are? Is there short-term political damage if Republicans don't ultimately agree to a 1/6 commission, or is the rational play for Republicans to reject it and play to the Trump base?
Well, obviously, I support it just on the merits. I think that they should have done it just because it's obviously the right thing to do. Politically speaking, I don't know if it hurts them that much because it's in keeping with their MO. I mean, it's no. I mean, it would actually be out of character for them at this point to support the 1/6 commission, bipartisan commission. So I don't think it. I politically, I don't think it really hurts them that much, to be honest. You could certainly make an argument that, there are, college-educated suburbanites who might be more likely to vote for them if they started to become a more sane, decent party. But nothing else. They're not going to do that anyway. So I think this is more a substantive problem than it is a political problem.
Well, I think there's potential political problem for either side, in my opinion. I mean, I think the average voter cares more about getting past the pandemic, cares about the economy. If there was a crime spike, they would care about a crime spike. And anything like a 1/6 commission, if people think that fight is distracting their representatives from dealing with the things that they care more about, that would be a problem for that particular party. If Democrats, I'll give you an example. Let's say Republicans actually propose a $1 trillion infrastructure bill this week. There's some talk of that from Roger Wicker. Democrats say, too small. On top of that, you're all a bunch of insurrectionists. You can't even do the 1/6 commission. You're not serious negotiating partners. So screw that. But they can't even get the 50 votes to get the infrastructure bill passed because the Joe Manchins of the world don't play along. That would make Democrats look like they were being unreasonable and too focused on the past to deal with the present. Now, I'm not saying I think that's what's going to happen here, but I'm saying that in that scenario, I think Democrats might be on the wrong end of 1/6 politics. Now, what I think is relatively more likely is that Republicans are failing to do anything on bread and butter issues. And they seem like they are so caught up in bowing to Trump that they can't meet Democrats halfway in anything. So you have John Thune saying, what seems to have happened here is a bipartisan deal was worked out in the House. They agreed to an even split of members. They agreed that both parties would share subpoena powers. It's not like Democrats could totally run the show. It was, John Katko was one of the guys, a Republican, House Republican, negotiated the deal. And then McCarthy, cuts Katko's legs out from under him and tells the Republican caucus, don't vote for this thing. Now, 35 do anyway. And so it's still a bipartisan bill. But McCarthy's position seemed to have infected McConnell to say he's against this now. And Thune was echoing that argument, saying, this is getting too partisan. And what Republicans really want to focus on here is the economy and jobs and national security and the border. And my attitude is,
good luck with that.
Well, if you want the focus to be on that, then agree to a 1/6 commission, so that is not a point of controversy. If everyone's agreeing on the commission, then you can focus on all these other things. But you're making 1/6 the bigger focus right now by making it into a partisan issue.
That's a valid point, but the fact is they can't do the 116 commission because Donald Trump doesn't want them to, which is the same reason they won't be able to focus on crime or whatever, inflation, whatever they wanted to talk about. They can't because Donald Trump is driving their messaging. And so that's why they needed to have the guts to get rid of him.
But that's potentially a short-term political problem. If the median voter is saying, you are so hung up on Trump, who I don't like. Donald Trump's favorability is at 32%. Your median voter does not like Donald Trump. Yes. So if the median voter says, you are so focused on Trump and like protecting him from what happened on 1/6, and you're not focused on the things that I care about, if you want a situation where you blow the midterms, you blow your chance to pick up seats, as history suggests you would do in a walk.
Yep.
I mean, and why does the out party usually pick up seats? Because the governing party, the majority party, is divided amongst itself, grappling with the realities of governing, and the opposition party can unite against their troubles. But if the Republicans are divided because of Trump, while Democrats are united in doing things like COVID relief and infrastructure, that's not your usual midterm dynamic.
Well, look, I think obviously Republicans have made this calculation that they can't distance themselves from Trump because that would mean losing Trump supporters or depressing them. And it would get even worse. The internecine battle would get even worse. Trump would start attacking Thune and other people. And so it is a calculation that they've made. And it may actually not be a crazy strategy, especially in a midterm election where turnout is not as high as a presidential election, where intensity and turning out your base and exciting your base matter even more. It could work out. I mean, as you know, Bill, the Republicans have every reason to think they're going to take back the House, even if they run a really bad, stupid campaign that's based on whatever Donald Trump wants to talk about on a given day. And so what very well could happen is they just kind of luck into winning, and then that confirms that sends the message that they did everything right and that they should keep on doing it.
I mean, what I think, Trump, in my mind, I wrote this for Real Clear Politics this week. Trump is like heroin to the Republican Party. They got a great high the first time in 2016, and then they're just chasing that high ever since, and they can't replicate it. Doesn't help them in 2018, doesn't help them in 2020. And yes, Trump is the dominant force in the party. And I agree that he is dictating their choices on things like Liz Cheney and this commission. But that's not the same as saying that 100% of Republicans want them to do these things. Mm-hmm. And even if the faction of the Never Trumpers is small, or the Trump skeptics is small, if you lose them in 2022, that does not help the midterm case. So there is this new paper by Catherine Clayton, who's a political science grad student at Stanford. It was picked up in the Thomas Edsall column in the Times. It says, Clayton finds that those who call themselves not very strong Republicans or consider themselves political independents that lean closer to the Republican Party demonstrate less favorable opinions of their party, reduced perceptions that the Democratic Party poses a threat, It even becomes more favorable toward the Democratic Party as a result of exposure to information about conflict within their party. So if you have, the Bill Kristols and the Rick Wilsons and the Jeff Flakes talking about how Republicans are not putting country over party, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, all of them, if they're getting oxygen because it's 1/6 commission. I mean, the reason why these folks stay Republican is, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I can't handle AOC. I can't handle these socialists who are going to be calling the shots for Joe Biden. But this paper suggests that fear gets reduced the more they're exposed to interesting Republican conflict.
Yeah.
And so I get that there is an addiction problem with Trump.
Yeah.
It's hard to shake the monkey.
They're addicted to Trump, even though he's bad for them and could kill them, but quitting him would lead to withdrawal and a sickness in the short term. And so it's a pretty good metaphor, because I do think in the short term, look, if Kevin McCarthy, and they needed to do this on like January 6th, by the way, but if Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell came out tomorrow and really said, we're done with Trump, we're cutting this guy loose, and stuck with it, it would probably actually hurt Republicans in the short run. There'd be some voters that they pick up. There'd be other voters that they lose. I suspect in the short run that there would be a major withdrawal, and they probably would take a hit and suffer. In the long run, I think it's the right move and would be healthier, right? But in the short run, like, quitting heroin cannot be fun.
I mean, this was Lindsey Graham back in March. There's something about Trump. There's a dark side and there's some magic there.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is just harness the magic. He can make the Republican Party something that nobody else I know can make it. He can make it bigger. He can make it stronger. He can make it more diverse. And he can also destroy it. And then more recently, after the whole Cheney thing, he said on Fox, can we move forward without President Trump? The answer is no. Here's a guy saying, I know he can kill us. I know this heroin thing is not super great all the time. But but there's something about it. Something magical.
And it's never gonna change. I mean, Trump, you can't take the good parts of heroin and leave the bad parts behind. Like, even if there are good parts, which I think diminish, obviously, eventually you're just trying to get back to normal. Even if there are good parts, you can't separate. You can't just like, we'll take the good and leave the bad, I mean, Graham there, like Graham's, that's not enabler talk. That's addict talk. Like, Graham is the addict. Thune, I might say, is the enabler. Thune is someone who also clearly knows better. And it says, well, the House doesn't want this 1/6 commission. Well, that's just because they want to talk about the economy. He's just not dealing with the reality and making excuses for them. But Graham is straight up like, put it in my veins. Put it right in my veins. But the truth is that quitting him will be very painful, and there will be major losses in the short term. But if you want to live, you have to go through rehab. You have to quit. And they're not willing to take the short-term hit for a long-term life. So I think that's a pretty good analogy.
Now, I'm curious, though.
Having never used heroin.
We should probably wrap up soon. But I did mention before, there is this floater by Roger Wicker, Republican senator.
Floater?
What's that?
There's a floater?
A floater, a trial balloon.
Oh, okay.
That they will, because Biden had a $1.7 trillion infrastructure counteroffer. It comes down from 2.3 to 1.7, and Senator Capito got a little huffy about it, was like, hey, Biden told us we weren't going to do this non-traditional infrastructure, and then we meet with the staff, and they give us the same bunk, just a slightly lower price tag. They're moving the goalpost here. Then Wicker comes in and says, look, well, maybe we can do $1 trillion. We'll do a counteroffer. It's $1 trillion. We'll come up off our number. And we'll see if they actually do it. We'll see if they actually can put a bill together. And, there's different ways you can count $1 trillion. Some people have pointed out that the Republican counting is kind of fuzzy, that they're using that's not all new money, and how much Democrats will poke at that, we'll see. But I do think that if Wicker proposes $1 trillion, even with fuzzy math, that's going to make it hard for a Joe Manchin to say, they're not serious here, we should just pull the plug and go reconciliation. You see some Democrats like Sheldon Whitehouse saying, we're wasting our time here. I just saw Dick Durbin say, we should think twice if we're going below $1.7 trillion. We've already come down a lot here. But they're not Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin says, this is a real offer, let's keep talking. You can't rush to reconciliation because you can't count on Manchin's vote. And if they do $1 trillion, or close to, and if Joe Manchin says, gotta keep talking here, and if Joe Biden says, there's enough to work with here, let's actually do this deal. We'll do this deal, we'll try to get other stuff in reconciliation later. What does that do to the Republican Party's mindset? It's not breaking with Trump over the commission, but it is reducing the partisan temperatures by striking a deal that some people thought wouldn't be possible. Do you think that, does that affect the Republican mindset in any way if that occurs?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it changes the Republican mindset, because you would be talking about 10 Republicans if they actually... Maybe
more. I mean, McConnell has been open-minded to this, just based on his words. He's said he talked about $800 billion, not a trillion, but he's been open to something.
If they do this in good faith and live up to it, and they end up getting this bipartisan deal, I mean, you never know, right? Baby steps, like maybe we look back and say that was a turning point. I'm skeptical that it would, it's not going to change Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But who knows?
Are you skeptical that it's going to happen, or skeptical that it would change the Republican Party's posture broadly?
Both. But mainly what you asked was about if it would change the Republican Party's posture. I just don't. I mean, they're so crazy right now. So maybe like one act of normalcy, maybe that's, the first step on a long journey. But I'm skeptical.
I can't speak to what the Republican Party would do going forward. I mean, I think McConnell would like to vote for an infrastructure bill and use that to justify obstructing most everything else. Hey, we did this. You can't say we're unreasonable.
That would be a pretty smart strategic move.
And I just don't see a lot in what either party has been saying. If past history was wholly irrelevant, if Donald Trump didn't exist, and you were just looking at what the people in each party were saying about infrastructure, you would say, I see where this deal comes together. They are far apart in like the price tag, but price tags, you can split the difference on price tags all the time. That's not that hard. They don't agree on their tax proposals, but you can pick and choose pieces of each. That's what compromise is. Like you take pieces of each people's things, and there is a way to do that here. It has been done many, many times in history. So, I mean, it would be, I thought that not getting it done on the relief bill was a pretty big blow to future bipartisan. If you can't get it on that, then what? Infrastructure was kind of like the last thing of relatively low-hanging fruit. I mean, with what has been said on the subject on infrastructure, if you still can't do a deal when people are saying things that have overlap, then that really makes you throw up your hands and say this can't be done here. And I'm skeptical Biden wants to land there. And I'm skeptical Joe Manchin wants to land there.
Yeah. This will be obviously a big test. I mean, if Republicans are loosey with the football, then that answers a lot of questions, right? But if they're able to work out a bipartisan deal, I think that would be good for the country.
Well, I mean, if Republicans put forth a $1 trillion counteroffer and Democrats say yes, and Republicans then move the goalpost and come up with some other excuse,
could happen.
That's terrible politics for Republicans.
Could happen.
They would look like idiots. Every time I talk about bipartisanship on Twitter, I get like 1,000 Lucy in the football memes thrown back at me.
Yeah.
And someone correct me if I'm missing an example here. I can think of 2 examples that fall in the Lucy in the football framework. One is Chuck Grassley's jerking around Max Baucus on Obamacare, which was largely a behind-the-scenes thing that we know more about now, Obama's memoir. I mean, people talked about it at the time. The Republicans were hemming and hawing. But I think the specifics that we didn't know as much about. And we have the immigration bill where Republicans talked a good game for a bit. They passed the bill in the Senate, and then Boehner moved the goalposts from where he was in November of 2012 to where he ended up in 2013.
Yeah.
Beyond that, Republicans just oppose things. Like, there's not a lot of, goalpost movement. They just don't like what Democrats are doing, and they try to stop it. Yeah. So I think it would be. It just doesn't make sense to me that it helps Republicans.
Well, no, but
to put an offer on the table and then backstab on it.
Well, but it's like the way that Kevin McCarthy empowered somebody to negotiate a deal and then didn't honor it. I mean, Trump did this too, right? With there were a couple of occasions where somebody hammered out a deal on behalf of Trump, and then Trump up and changed his mind at the last minute.
Well, Trump's his own, category of insanity and irrationality and unpredictability. I mean, I don't think Trump is what people think of when they think of Lucy in the football. They think of Mitch McConnell and Obama, and the Obama constantly trying to chase a bipartisan deal for things.
I think Biden has to try. I mean, he ran. Part of his brand was that he was going to try to work across the aisle and try to work with Republicans, and then he could work with Republicans. And then he gets in office, and the first thing he does is steamroll Republicans. And maybe they can't be trusted. Maybe they can't be, maybe they can't negotiate with him in good faith. Like, maybe they're just going to be obstructionists. But we don't actually know that yet. And I think he has to try. Now, some people say, you're wasting your time. Time is precious. It's trying to run out the clock on him. Or even if you do get a compromise, then we don't get the benefit. It's just too little. And so I get those. I understand those arguments. I think that one of the deliverables for Joe Biden is a return to normalcy and comity. And I think he has to at least try, get caught trying. In other words, if it doesn't work, it won't work. But he has to give it a real shot. He hasn't done that really.
Well, and a lot of Democrats think that's all Biden's doing here. He's just getting caught trying, and Republicans expose their lack of seriousness. Biden can walk. He can have his cake and eat it too. He can be seen as bipartisan and get a partisan deal. If Republicans go up to $1 trillion, I don't think you can walk away as easily. Now, granted, I'm not saying he can't walk away, especially if he has Joe Manchin. I mean, if he has Joe Manchin.
Well, I mean, I don't think I don't think he's trying if he's not willing to give. You know, he's already given. He's already come down some. But I don't think compromise is, well, we're going to do $1.9 trillion and we'd love to have you on board, but we're going to do it whether you like it or not. He has to engage in a good faith effort to compromise. And again, he has come down some. I think that there's room to meet in the middle.
And so if there's a $1 trillion counteroffer, and then Biden and the Democrats walk away from it with Joe Manchin,
yeah.
I mean, arguably, Democrats are still better off passing something than nothing. Gee, I'm mad you didn't take the $1 trillion offer and you gave me $2 trillion instead. You know, that might be a perfectly fine place for Democrats to be in, if that's the case. But there you would have that lingering complaint from Republicans that they weren't bipartisan.
Well,
that would help them, which would help Republicans justify future obstruction. If there's other things that Democrats want that the public wants that they're not getting, maybe that complicates Democratic messaging.
I think what you want is for Republicans to be the ones who walk away from the deal. So if Republicans offer $1 trillion, you either take it or you say, okay, how about 1.2? And then if Republicans aren't willing to go there, that's on them.
I mean, this is what negotiation is. I mean, this is why, I mean, people are treating every step in this process immediately as failure. Biden does 1.7 trillion. Cabinet doesn't like it. We're all done here. I'm like, it's like you haven't seen a negotiation before. I mean, it's not like I'm not promising it's all going to work out in the end, because it could totally fall apart and Democrats go on their own. That's a perfectly reasonable prediction to make, but you can't assume it to be the case just because an offer was not immediately accepted. Yeah. And the thing is, once you're in it and you're making counteroffers, you may say, oh, this is all kabuki, insincere performing. But at some point, it's not. At some point, I mean, it makes news. It gets talked about. And once you make the offer, you got to anticipate the possibility that someone's going to accept it. Yeah. And so if you keep going back and forth, guess what? You might actually meet in the middle at some point, because it's hard to walk away once it becomes kind of real.
Well, Bill, I have to say, we got off to a depressing start, but you've ended us on something of a hopeful, optimistic note.
I think hope. If you want Democrats to shoot the moon and get $4 trillion, then it's not hopeful for you that they're considering this.
Well, no, but I think the possibility that we can work together and get things done in bipartisan fashion.
I did a Twitter thread last night. There's a Politico piece that's headline, talks on verge of collapse. And then you read the piece, and it's like 90% of these quotes are quotes saying they still want to talk. So all I'm saying is, again, I'm not making predictions. I'm just looking at what they are saying, and most of what they are saying are the ingredients of a deal. That's what I see. I mean, people may not be on the level, and people may move the goalposts and walk away still. But what they're saying allows for a deal to occur.
On that note, I say we declare victory.
Mission accomplished. Put the banners up.
It's a done deal. You heard it here first. Bill Scher says it will happen. There will be a bipartisan infrastructure deal. You heard it here first. Bill is guaranteeing that. If you bet with Bill, you make money on these sort of things. So anything people should read or you want to plug?
I think I already plugged all my things. Anything you have left off the table?
Let's see. So I'm doing a podcast right after I get off this with Bernard Goldberg, legendary.
Not one of my favorites, I got to say.
You don't like Bernard Goldberg?
He does all the liberal media bias stuff. That's always
he's a straight shooter. He's a straight shooter. He calls him like he sees him. Legendary journalist, and then I'm going to have on later today Tim Madigan, who wrote this 20 years ago, The Burning, the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. So June 1st is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and the book is having its 20th anniversary. She's coming on my podcast to talk about it.
Because I'm one of these terrible white people who did not know about Tulsa till last year.
Most people didn't, partly because Tulsa hid the information for many years. They got rid of all the newspapers. They cut out the part of the newspaper that would microfiche. They did mass graves. We don't even know where a lot of the bodies are buried yet. So it's not an accident that most of us were not familiar with this story. That was part of the intent. But it's insane. If people don't know the story, it's crazy. And you should get the book or listen to my podcast. Or there was actually a Stuff You Should Know podcast about it a couple years ago that is pretty good. So stay tuned for all that.
And so I credit to this guy for doing this 20 years ago. And
he didn't know about it. He was a reporter a newspaper reporter in Fort Worth or something, and he ran across it, and he had never really heard of it before. So he is the guy primarily responsible for popularizing.
I hope he's getting his due now.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I'll see you on the Zoom on Friday. And I'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you guys.
On the Zoom on Monday, the Supreme Court decision to take that case, totally negating the piece I wrote about. They're hesitant to take the case back in March.
Bill Scher, hardest hit.
But I think there's a lot to talk about there, so that'll be a good Zoom topic for us on Friday.
Yeah, so that's a good argument for why people should join the support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Bill Scher or patreon.com/Matt Lewis, and you'll be invited on.
All right. I'll see you Friday, and we'll talk again here in the DMZ next week.
You got it. Thanks, man.